Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It's not for nothing that they say you should judge a book by its cover. And this rule will be remembered for life by Michael's parents, who did not stand out in the best way. And from the very first phrase destroyed all hopes for good relations with the parents of the bride. They did not even suspect that they may not be as simple as at first glance. From the very early childhood, Adriana realized how difficult it is to work and receive even the most modest salary. She did not grow up in a well-to-do family, so from a very young age she had to work part-time, run errands, and attend school to avoid any problems with social services. The girl understood perfectly well that no one owed her anything. Therefore, in case she had a need to buy certain things or to pay school fees, to buy books or notebooks, she tried to solve the problem herself, without turning to her parents, and in general, there was no point in turning to them, as they never tried to help their child and solve the problem. Throughout her time at school, Adriana had a very difficult time. Not only was she extremely exhausted, at numerous part-time jobs and while doing chores, but also suffered numerous bullying from classmates. The girl tried not to pay attention, but sometimes the antics of classmates just crossed all the boundaries. And on such days, Adriana could cry long and bitterly, worrying about the fact that her life is not like the lives of many other children who constantly surround her. On one such day, Adriana came home from school in tears. One of her classmates was bullying her and calling her names, and all the others supported him. And that made Adriana very sad. And right after she stepped outside the school grounds, hot tears flowed down her cheeks. If they only understood how hard it is for me to live, if they only knew how hard it is to be from a dysfunctional family, and to succeed and earn a living with your own efforts and endeavors. They just don't realize how bad it is for me, how difficult it is for me, because their lives are simple and secure. They don't know what it's like to eat nothing but a piece of bread for a few days. They don't know how scary it is to live with unreliable parents who fight and yell all the time and who look in those moments. Scary and aggressive. If only they knew and understood. The girl could not calm down. Numerous thoughts and worries were swirling in her head, not giving her the opportunity to just forget about everything that had happened and continue to live as if nothing had happened. But she didn't know that the worst and hardest part of the day hadn't even arrived yet. At the moment when Adriana returned home, her parents were in a drunken state, and they immediately noticed that the girl came crying. And immediately after that, Adriana received a lot of loud words from the most dear to her people. "What kind of problems can you have?" practically shouted the girl's mother. "It's me and my father who have problems. No work, no money, and she's whining about nothing. You're just a pathetic, spineless, and snotty girl who will never achieve anything. All you can do is whine, not solve your own problems. I don't want to see you. If you're going to cry anymore, go outside." "But Mom," Adriana tried not to cry, but the tears themselves kept flowing down her face. "I've really had a very hard day. How can you say that about me? I'm your daughter. You're the one who wanted to give birth to me. I didn't want anything. I didn't have a choice. If you had, I wouldn't have. Now get out of my sight. I never want to see you again." The girl continued to stand in one place, hoping that the woman would change her mind now, and then everything would be fine. But she went to another room, clearly signaling that she was not going to continue the conversation and solve the problem. And at that moment her father, or rather, the one who appeared to be her father, approached the girl. The girl did not know the father, as her mother herself had no idea from whom she could get pregnant. The woman simply began to live with the man who agreed to take her in such a situation. Adriana knew this very well. In fact, the woman did not hide this information. Neither did her roommate. Both were rude and treated the child like a servant. They didn't treat the girl, didn't prepare her for school, didn't inquire about her grades, and never went to parent-teacher conferences. Everyone at school had already gotten used to the fact that Adriana's parents could not be expected to take any part in the life of the class and the girl herself. That's why they stopped even trying to contact them. "Listen to me," the man spoke harshly. "If you get in our way, you'll just end up on the street. Don't expect to be some kind of favorite or special child. You're nothing to me, so you risk being in a bad situation if you piss me off. And you don't want to know what happens if you do. You got me. I don't mind doing another stretch, but you won't be able to go back to your normal life." The man smiled predatorily, then pushed the girl away and followed her mother to continue their peculiar entertainment. This conversation frightened Adriana, but she kept silent until the very end, trying not to show her own weakness, trying not to provoke these scary people in any way. Until 9th grade, Adriana endured numerous bullying and humiliation from her own parents. But after another evening scandal, she packed her things and just left, without saying anything about where she would be and with whom. And her parents did not ask the girl where she was going and how she was going to live. They did not want to take care of her problems. And after the girl only heard one single phrase from her mother, "She should have kicked you out earlier so that you wouldn't take up space in the house," Adriana went to the hostel to her friend, who agreed to shelter her for a while, until the girl cannot find a new housing option. But as a result, it turned out that she stayed in the hostel for many 5 years, during which she finished school, looked for a decent job, and received education in the chosen direction. The girl did not have the opportunity to get a full-fledged education in her chosen specialty, but she completed professional courses, where she received the minimum knowledge and practical skills that were simply necessary for professional activity. Until the age of 23, Adriana lived on the edge of poverty. Despite the fact that the girl constantly worked, her wages were barely enough to pay for the rent, utilities, groceries, and school fees. The girl saved the rest on a savings account, but the amount over the years was so low that it was not even enough to pay for the first year of college as a correspondence student. After all, it was necessary to study for 4 years. Therefore, it was up to the age of 23 that the girl experienced severe money problems. The fact is that it was at this age that she decided to apply for a college-basis competition, during which she met a man who changed her whole life. Adriana applied to law school, a once-a-year program. One of the students could enter completely free of charge by going through a competitive selection process, during which numerous questions are asked about the major, and the potential student is interviewed about his or her capabilities and ambitions. The girl was confident that she would be able to qualify for the only budget place. After all, she had spent so much time and effort to learn numerous terms and concepts, to understand complex topics, and even to pass several practical tasks, even though she was working in a completely different line of work. Her only dream was to become a great lawyer and advocate to handle cases involving minor children, domestic violence, and more. She wanted to help those who found themselves in difficult life situations due to lack of choices, and many opportunities due to restriction of rights and domestic violence, threats, fear. Adriana was invited to take a survey and undergo testing, which would be the basis for a decision on admission. Adriana wrote the written part, in which she answered almost 90% of the given tasks correctly. After that, she went to the oral part, where the dean's office learned about what kind of person was planning to enroll, why it was on a budgetary basis, why their college was chosen, and so on. The main person who asked questions was the principal, and her assistant was the deputy head of the regional education department, Ethan. Adriana had never heard of this man before, even though he looked great and had a trim form. She had not seen him on TV news or even heard a glimpse of his name. As it turned out, Ethan just didn't like to advertise himself in public, didn't like loud words, and wasn't looking for public recognition. So he preferred to stay in the shadows, doing good deeds and quietly building his own happiness and carefree life. Adriana noticed at once that the man did not take his eyes off her, from the very moment she entered the office for the interview. But the girl tried not to pay attention to it, answering every question in detail and paying as much attention as possible to her perspective and responsibility, maturity, and so on. She tried to highlight all her positive aspects to make a positive impression, and she was confident that she had successfully passed the interview. But after answering the last question, the girl heard a thank you. "In case of winning the competition, we will call you back. Goodbye." This answer did not give any hope that someone would call her. Moreover, Adriana was sure that she didn't pass the contest, since no one said anything, didn't immediately announce her positive impression, and so on. It turns out that her life will never change. During the next week, the girl still hoped that she would really be able to enroll in an educational institution, get an education on a part-time basis, and start a professional career. But over the next 7 and then 10 days, no one called her. On the 14th day, hope died completely. After all, it should take no more than 2 weeks to analyze and summarize the results. So she hadn't passed after all. The girl didn't have time to feel sorry for herself and think about why life was so unfair to her, why she didn't succeed, and so on. It was necessary to work and continue to develop a plan, how to get the desired education and real practical experience, so that in the future to get the opportunity to become an excellent specialist who will bring each case to the end. There were not too many options, and the most affordable and logical of all was to simply wait until the next school year to go to college again and interview for other answers to the standard questions, and still make a positive impression on the committee. Luck loves the persistent. There's a reason they say that. It turns out that now all Adriana can do is to continue to work and try to save money to ensure the least possible burden during the session and preparation for them. Suddenly, one evening, a call comes in. "Hello," a girl asks cautiously. Picking up the phone with an unfamiliar number, I listen to you carefully. "Who is this? Do you want something from me?" "Yes. Hello, Adriana. This is Ethan. I was present when you took the oral bar admission test. I wanted to hear from you, I'm sorry, so I got into training. No one called me and told me about it. I was sure I didn't qualify and someone else did." "That's right, you didn't qualify." The man stammered, "I just wanted to hear your voice. I liked you the moment I saw you, and I'd like, if you don't mind, to take you out for a mug of coffee. It would be a pleasure to spend some time with you and get to know you a little better without any subtext." Adriana was confused by such an offer. She had expected to hear anything but that a very famous and rich man wanted to meet her. She was silent for a few seconds, but she realized that her excellent relationship with Ethan could play a significant role in her future, and yet she spoke in a confident and affectionate voice. "Yes, of course, I'd love to spend time with you too. Only I haven't had a paycheck yet this month. Let's better meet at the end of the month after it will be paid." "Okay, I'll definitely call you after I get a chance. I'll be sure to call you after I get a chance." "Oh no, I can pay for your order in full. And not just the coffee, but whatever delicious dessert you like. You don't have to worry about your finances. I'm taking care of all the expenses." So, after talking to the man for a while, Adriana agreed to the meeting. She didn't really have any money problems. She just wanted to test how generous and courteous the man would be. And after getting a satisfactory response to her lack of money, she agreed to the date, realizing that a potentially lucrative relationship could be built with this man. Adriana and Ethan's encounter went great throughout the entire meeting. The girl behaved in a casual and feminine manner. She wore one of her best dresses and attractive makeup, as well as learned about what topics to talk about with a man, and studied some news in the direction of education. Adriana was perfectly prepared for the date, and therefore simply could not fail to make a positive impression. As a result, Ethan was simply delighted with how beautiful, intelligent, and motivated she was. He often told Adriana about it, which only made her feel more confident in her own attractiveness and desirability. The couple began to rapidly develop relations, which came to a very logical result: a marriage of convenience. Despite the fact that Ethan really loved the girl and was ready for her to make various sacrifices and feats for her sake, Adriana could not say the same about him. She simply realized that marriage to a man who was older and more successful than her was a ticket to a happy life that should not be missed. You have to jump on the last carriage and rush toward your dreams. But at the same time, it cannot be said that Adriana had a bad attitude towards the man. No, quite the opposite. She treated him even better, as many wives do to their husbands. She realized that it was thanks to the presence of this man in her life that she was able to change her future, to plunge into a rich life, to stop needing even natural necessities, and to let go of all the problems that had been accumulating for years. Moreover, Ethan gave his wife the opportunity to train in any direction, so that she could do exactly what she loved to do. And Adriana did not argue or refuse. She eagerly began to study the options and choose the best offer among the huge number of presented, and then to study. Adriana successfully completed her studies, and after receiving a diploma on secondary specialized education, she entered the university. In order to get a higher education, she wanted to make the most of the opportunity to manage her husband's money without any restrictions or problems in order to ensure a happy and promising future for herself. Even if for some reason the marriage breaks up, and now finally the higher education is obtained, and the woman begins to work full-time, quickly finding an excellent offer. Adriana established herself as an excellent employee who not only knows all the theoretical material, but can solve even the most complex case without the slightest hesitation in the shortest possible time. It was this advantage of the woman that made her stand out from other numerous employees. And it is exactly what became her calling card: building a successful career as an attorney and lawyer. Despite the fact that the woman was quite cold to her husband, they had a fairly close relationship, as a result of which a beautiful girl was born. Adriana thought for a long time about what to name the child, and as a result she settled on the name Betty. Now, even in the event that Ethan leaves her, he will still be obliged to make monthly payments until the girl turns 18. And so Adriana was no longer afraid of being destitute after the baby was born. Although she was sure that she could at any moment return to her favorite job and independently provide everything necessary not only for herself, but also for her daughter. Ethan made it clear that his wife was really dear to him, and therefore he was not going to part with her and even quarrel with her without a serious reason. The life of a poor little girl from a disadvantaged family, who often denied herself food and endured numerous bullying from her classmates. But now she has grown up and become successful in her direction. Despite all the loud words of her parents and frequent self-doubt, it remained only worthy to educate her daughter to understand that money is not a simple piece of paper, but something that has a direct impact on the life and future of a person. Something without which it would be impossible to realize all one's desires. And no less important is to let her daughter understand how difficult it is to earn money, and why it is important to appreciate even small things so that in the future she will not be left with nothing. Betty was a rather quiet child who from a very early age got used to independence. Her mother taught her not only how to prepare simple meals, but also the basics of cooking. She told her about the importance of self-development and finding her own way in life, showed by her own example the importance of sports in life and the results of constant learning and self-development. Adriana believed that only consistent long-term learning can bring real positive results. Therefore, day after day, little Betty gained new knowledge and skills that could be useful for her in her future independent life. "Mommy, won't I live with you when I grow up?" The girl once asked Adriana when she was teaching her how to read meters and understand numerous utility documents. "I'm only 12 years old, and you're already telling me how to rent an apartment and pay for everything I use. Don't you think it's a little early for me to know all that? I'll grow up and then I'll learn it all when I need to." Adriana sighed heavily and then looked at her daughter. "My darling, listen to me, please. You must learn to do everything that adults do, and as early as possible, so that you don't have any problems with all this in the future. In case something happens to me and Daddy or we go somewhere else, you have to fill in all these papers yourself and take them with the money to the bank branch. And then you won't have any problems and no one will come to you for non-payment. And everything I tell you and what I teach you, it is all important for you. So pay attention, and let's get on with it. And it's for your own good." The girl just nodded, then carefully looked at the receipt, which was right in front of her. Betty did her best to understand what her mother was saying and what was required of her. Some things worked, some things had to be repeated several times so that the girl understood the correct sequence of actions and could come to the right result on her own. Betty went to the most ordinary school, did not stand out from the crowd of other classmates, and did not show her own superiority in financial terms. She studied during the summer, sometimes worked part-time, helped her parents at home in general, was the most ordinary child. And it could not be said that she had a very wealthy family with hundreds of thousands in their accounts. Adriana always liked modesty, and therefore the external decoration of the house was laconic, but simple, not too expensive and flashy, so as not to attract too much attention. But inside, the couple placed expensive furniture. Famous paintings used natural wood and stone. The interior smelled of luxury and wealth. Adriana was not against investing a huge amount of money to decorate the interior of the house, as she herself was happy to live in comfort and prosperity. Her only wish was not to show her wealth in public and not to draw attention to her family. That was all. And in this, Ethan fully supported her. He didn't like it either. At that moment, when Betty began to have her first girlfriends, who asked to visit and agreed to go to each other's houses for sleepovers, the girl and her mom had a serious conversation that helped her learn a very important life lesson. Not all people have good intentions. Listen, the little girl once told Adriana to her daughter, "Not all the people you think are friends are actually friends." Unfortunately, there are a lot of bad people in the world who will try to seem good to get closer to you. Some of them will only do this for their own good, trying to make things as good as they can for themselves, even if it causes you pain and discomfort. And the more people know that you have rich parents and have everything that every child can dream of, they will become more and more. And it will be the same not only with your friends, but also with your loved ones who will be with you just because of your wealth. Adriana hesitated, realizing that she herself had married her husband out of convenience. It wasn't until many years later that she realized that she really loved him. But marriages that are made for money aren't always bad. Sometimes the other person needs someone to be there for them, someone who will support and help in times of need. But to find such a person who will not try to take all to himself and who will just be around is very difficult, and therefore try to still marry for love. Good, so you will be sure that your favorite person really loves you and wants to spend his whole life with you. So what happens if my friends find out that we have money? Would that make me a bad person? My friend's parents have a lot of money too, but she has a lot of friends. Why can't I have the same? Why is it okay for someone to brag, but you can't let me? Baby, I'm not forbidding you. You just need to be smarter than all those around you and not let close to those who can take advantage of you and then leave you all alone. Such people don't deserve your attention and certainly shouldn't be the cause of your tears. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't be friends or socialize with anyone. You just have to be a smart girl who knows who you can trust and who you should keep some distance from. This conversation with her mother made the girl think about everything she had said. She made the decision not to call anyone to her house and tell everyone that her parents are poor and that she can't afford any coffee outside of school. And she certainly doesn't have any money for coffee. Betty decided that such tactics would be the most correct and would allow her to simply and quickly realize who is friends with her just to get some money or other material benefits, and who would be there for her, even in the event that she has nothing left, if she decides to refuse the help of her parents and achieve everything on her own. And it turned out that she didn't have many friends, and most of the people who were around just enjoyed the free candy she often brought to school and the many other treats. And after Betty had mentioned that her parents were having some money problems and she couldn't give anyone any more treats, those people just disappeared from her sight. That's what the girl said for all the next years, so as not to attract any extra attention from unnecessary people. Often it repelled new acquaintances. But there were also those who were not bothered by the lack of money from her parents, and therefore they continued to actively communicate with Betty, to build friendships with her. There were only a few of them. The girl successfully completed her studies at school, after which she entered the Institute for Journalism. She was not yet sure that this is what she wanted to do all her life. That's why she was very doubtful about the curriculum. Betty tried to understand which subjects she liked and were of some interest, and which ones were not interesting at all and made her simply bored. For the most part, she stayed in her chosen major only because there was a guy in her group that she liked very much. It seemed to her that he showed certain signs of attention, but there were no obvious steps and actions. Michael. This was the name of the boy Betty liked, a handsome and tall young man who was immersed in his chosen field of study. He not only listened to numerous lectures, but also showed just incredible activity during group assignments and when studying narrow topics. It was this eagerness that caused Betty to take more responsibility for every moment that had a direct relation to her studies. As a result, she immersed herself in journalism completely. And only at that moment she realized that she had not made a mistake in choosing the most attractive direction, which inspires her and makes her do her own development and training, spend a huge amount of time studying new materials. Michael was from a fairly well-to-do family. His parents were not as rich as Betty's parents, except that at the university, no one knew anything about the girl's family except what she said herself. As a result, the whole group was sure that the girl had certain difficulties with money, and that's why she refused from numerous group trips and trips to cafes, not even guessing that the main reason was in repeated visits to all the proposed places and a well-composed proper diet. Some even whispered that Betty was trying to make eyes at Michael just to get the opportunity to make full use of his money and bring herself to a new social level. But there was no evidence of this except the words of envious people. For months, Betty tried to get the guy's attention, and it wasn't until they were paired up together to do another group project that they managed to talk. Betty was raised by her mother to always be bold and pursue the truth in every way possible. That's why the moment Betty sat down with the boy, she immediately asked, "What's the reason you've been avoiding me so hard? I've noticed you leaving the cafe right away. In the case where I come in, you leave right away. I've also noticed that in numerous group assignments I've never been on the same team with you, which is very strange, even from the point of view of probability theory. In all that time of doing so many paired projects, today clearly should not have been the first time we had to work together. After all, teachers assign based on grades and location on the interest grade list, and so on. Do you know why we were suddenly in the same pair today? Because I approached the teacher and said that such behavior on his part violates my opportunities and disadvantages me. And miraculously, we were put together for an assignment." Michael was silent after Betty's fiery speech of speculation and reasoning was over. He didn't refute the words in any way, but he didn't confirm them either. He just stared silently at the board, which was completely blank. The silence continued for a few minutes, after which the guy slowly turned his head to the girl, as if looking at her from the bottom up, and then sighed heavily and answered, "The problem isn't you, it's me. It's just that I really liked you. That's it. Well, I like you a lot too, so I don't see what the problem is. There is a problem. You see, my parents are quite well-to-do people who have their own rules and certain requirements for my lifestyle. And the girl I choose, they don't want my girlfriend, let alone someone more like a potential bride, to be from an ordinary family, let alone a poor one. And everyone knows your family isn't exactly well-to-do. I don't think we can fully date and make any plans for the future with that in mind. And in order not to make myself nervous and not to think about you, I just decided to keep away from you and not to cross paths with you neither during my studies nor at any other moments." The boy lowered his head and stared intently at the board again, to avoid crossing his gaze with the girl he liked. "I don't think we should do this project together." Betty thought about how this problem could be solved so that she wouldn't end up giving up on the guy she liked so much. She looked at him carefully, after which she said confidently, "And if your parents like me, you didn't even try to do anything to smooth things over as much as possible. You talked to your parents about how you might like a normal girl and why you have to do exactly what they want, not you. You see, the problem here is that they are paying for my tuition in full, and therefore I can't go against them. Otherwise, I won't be able to continue studying at the university. We're on a budget. What does that have to do with money? I don't have money, but I'm in the same class as you. And I also study without restricting myself. Nobody expelled me because I don't have money. Yeah, well, you're the ones who go to school for free. And my parents paid to the dean's office to get me into this group and will pay every year, because there was no room for me. So if I do something they don't like, I'm out of school. And I'm not ready to just give up my dream of being a journalist." "I see," Betty said thoughtfully, realizing that the situation was more complicated than she had originally thought. "But do we have to meet your parents? We could just go out until you've solved all your financial problems and finished your studies, and then we could just talk about everything. Or we could start by trying to talk to your parents and tell them that I'm a very decent girl, homemaker, self-motivated, not a money grubber, and all. I think they should believe me. I don't really have any malicious intent. And in case you do nothing, your parents will manipulate you until you die, and they will find you a wife, choose a house, and tell you where to work. Is that the kind of life you want for yourself? You're right, the guy said suddenly. We should at least try to change something in case they refuse and forbid to build a relationship with you. Then we will have to think and decide something. But the first thing, you should just try to introduce you. Maybe they really like you and everything will go great. But first, we need to get to know each other so we can tell our relatives about each other. Maybe we could go out. Betty agreed. They went on a few dates, talked about their families and childhoods, their plans for the future. The girl tried to avoid the topic of family, so she wouldn't lie to her boyfriend and talk about things that wouldn't turn out to be real in the end. Despite the fact that Betty perfectly understood that Michael would not treat her better or worse in case he found out about the situation of her family, she still decided to keep the matter under wraps to see how his parents' attitudes would turn out. Now the couple did almost all assignments only together. Many teachers liked their work and the quality of their numerous assignments, and therefore had nothing against Betty and Michael's preference for joint projects. Moreover, many believed that in this way it would be possible to get two brilliant journalists who would learn from each other unique moments and some advantages chips that they lacked. Many people didn't even realize that the pair of students were secretly dating. After all, they tried not to show anything in public so that rumors would not reach Michael's parents. That's what Betty decided, and the guy didn't mind. After a couple of months, Michael decided to propose. Let me tell my parents that my girlfriend is coming to dinner. It's time for you two to get acquainted and see how it ends, so you can think about what to do next. In case they don't like you, we'll continue dating the same way. And if they accept you perfectly, which I'll be very surprised, then we can keep our relationship private. You're in. Yeah, go ahead. Only I don't have any expensive clothes in my closet. You just need to be yourself, so that my parents understand that my girlfriend is an ordinary girl from a poor family, and that they don't have false expectations of you. You don't have to hide the truth, because they'll find out about you quickly with their connections. Betty grinned, but didn't say anything. She realized that no one could know anything about her parents or herself until she wanted to. All information is carefully hidden, including in the university itself. The girl decided not to bring any documents, so that no one would ask questions or treat her in a special way. Of course, in school and kindergarten information about parents was indicated in full, as required by the established rules, but all information was considered personal information. Therefore, parents Betty warned educators and teachers about what would happen in case of its dissemination. As a result, over the years, no one ever found out that Betty came from a very wealthy family. From the educators themselves, at least, the preparation for the acquaintance was in full swing. Betty had long been choosing what to wear to her boyfriend's parents to make a positive impression, but at the same time to look exactly the financial situation that she tells everyone about. As a result, she decided on a simple but laconic monochrome dress, which perfectly emphasized the girl's figure. Of the jewelry, she just wore small pearl earrings. Yes, it was too expensive jewelry for a girl from a poor family. But quite often her friends decided that it was a simple piece of jewelry from the costume jewelry section, just well made by a master craftsman. Was Betty worried before meeting the young man's parents? Absolutely. But she tried not to show her excitement and worries in any way, and kept proud and confident. Michael met the girl almost near her house, after which they walked to the house of the guy. As it turned out, they lived not so far from each other, and therefore, they did not have to use cabs or public transportation. They talked about how the evening might end. Michael told how to behave properly with his parents, on what topics should not talk in order not to provoke any conflict or unpleasant situations, and so on. At the same time, the guy did not limit the girl in any way. He didn't talk about how she should behave differently than she was comfortable with. He didn't ask her to change or play a role. just answering Betty's questions and trying to be supportive. Just before she entered the house, Michael stopped and spoke seriously. In case there's any situation that comes up that's out of the realm of reason, or if my parents tell you something you don't like, I really ask you just don't get into any scandals. I don't want your family to have any problems because of my parents' impulsive and irritable nature. Promise me that. I will. But I don't promise I'll take the abuse. All right, fine. If they say something to you that is insulting to you or your family, I will definitely stand up for you, okay? Just don't start the conflict yourself. No matter what happens as a result, I'll always be there for you. Don't be afraid. The girl nodded, and they entered the house. Inside, the decoration was made quite richly, but at the same time too pretentious and not harmonious. It was obvious that Michael's parents had invested a huge amount of money in acquiring all the elements. But as a result, they did not attract attention and did not make you look at and permeate the culture and wealth, but simply attracted each other's attention, which just made my head spin. Betty looked around carefully, and then she heard that you shouldn't look so closely. It's obvious that you've never seen a painting before. It's not cultural to look around so much. No, it's just that you have a lot of stuff here, and as a result, my eyes just run wild. I don't even know what to look at first. Yeah, well, the rich have their quirks. My mother's very fond of paintings. That's why we have so many paintings and stuff. She's planning to buy a few more to hang in the closet. But my father talks her out of it, saying that we don't have enough space as it is. I think I agree with your father here. You really don't have room. No, you should try to make friends with my mother, Kathy. She's more strict about choosing my fiancé and harder to get along with than my father, Benjamin. If you can make friends with her, you'll be fine, since my father won't go against her. The most important thing is not to interrupt her, and do not interrupt her. Don't provoke her in any way, please. I'm not restricting you. It's just that it will affect our future. I understand perfectly well. I'll be on my best behavior. The couple went into the living room where the boys' parents were already waiting for them. They were looking at the fireplace and talking to each other in a whisper. They turned toward Michael and Betty at the same time. It gave the girl an anxious shiver. She squeezed the young man's hand tighter, and he moved closer to her. Mom, Dad, let me introduce you to Betty. The same girl I've told you so much about. She still managed to find time between classes to meet you. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get to you. There have been so many projects and extra classes lately that I've enjoyed attending. I had planned today in advance so that I could take the time to get to know you and not be rushed. Betty smiled, but the expression on the young man's parents' faces didn't even change. They just continued to stare at the girl in silence. I'm not interested in your apologies and excuses. I can see from you that you are not from our stratum of society, and therefore I don't see any sense in trying to build a positive relationship with you. It's very likely that my son just doesn't realize who he's messing with. If you're trying to mess with his head, you're not going to succeed. I can see right through you. Betty just didn't know how to even respond to such a statement. She really couldn't come earlier because of her studies, and her boyfriend's parents, not that they didn't enter into her situation, but even immediately made it clear that they weren't interested or attracted to her. Even though there were no questions asked, they just judged her on her appearance, and that was it. I'm sorry, what made you think I wasn't right for your son? He and I have a great relationship, so I don't see any problem with us being in a relationship. Besides, Michael often tells me that we have a happy future, and I believe him. So let's get to know each other so we know whose family I will be joining. Betty sat down on a chair and Michael next to her on a chair. He said nothing. His mother, on the other hand, objected. Betty, that's right. Why did you sit on the chair? While my son sat in a regular chair. Guests in our house only sit on furniture after permission has been granted. I don't remember anyone asking you to sit down. I should get up. Betty asked sharply, getting up. But Michael pulled her down, forcing her to sit back up, then said, Mom, stop it. Let her sit down, she's a guest. Is that really how you treat all guests? Let's have some social decorum. Son, before you ask such questions, take another look at your companion and realize who you've brought home. She's not subject to the rules of decorum. She just doesn't know them because she wasn't educated in a secular family. so let's not bring it up. And as for my behavior, I behave well only with invited and welcome guests, not with girls from the street. I don't have to behave with her the same way I do with deputies or professors. Kathy gave Betty a menacing look that made her uncomfortable. But let Betty tell us about herself, Benjamin said suddenly, and she'll tell us who she is, where she's from, and why she chose our son among so many guys. Betty looked at Michael in silence for a few seconds, then turned to his father, smiled, and confidently answered his question that it was not me who chose him, but he chose me. He looked at me all the time at university. We did all our work together, and then he confessed to me that he cared about me. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I have to admit, I liked your son too. So I didn't see any reason to turn down the offer to start a relationship. And now we are sitting here in front of you and telling about our love story. The girl smiled, but the boy's mother definitely did not share her joy. She furrowed her eyebrows. Then she looked at Michael menacingly. The woman didn't say anything, but just continued to stare, while Betty continued to talk about how she and Michael had just started dating, how many compliments and nice gestures he had made, and so on. It was only after the girl's story was over that Kathy said in a stern and gruff voice, "My son couldn't have been the first to show you signs of attention. It was you who seduced him. And that's the only reason why his gaze clouded over. Don't think you can get away with it. Our son will sooner or later come to his senses and return to a normal, full life, find a normal girl to marry and live in a happy marriage. And you will be left at a broken trough, as in the famous fairy tale. If you know it, of course." To say that Betty was shocked by such behavior on the part of the mother of her chosen one is not to say anything. She just didn't know how to respond to such behavior or whether she should respond at all. Considering that Michael had asked her otherwise, she looked at her young man, who was just as confused as she was. Even though the guy had expected his parents' rejection of the poor girl, he had never even considered that his mother might react so inadequately and aggressively that she would blame Betty for everything. The few minutes of silence just seemed like an eternity. Betty was already sure that the young man would not stand up for her at all, and therefore she would have to solve the situation on her own. But suddenly Michael rose abruptly from his chair, pulling Betty to stand up. Then he spoke loudly. "This is what I'm telling you both right now. In case you treat my girlfriend badly, our relationship with you will also be ruined. I am well aware that she is not from a rich family and that throughout my life, you have constantly told me that a girl should match our status. I love her, and that's the end of it. There will be no change, just because my choices don't suit you. So please treat Betty with respect. That's never going to happen. Don't even dream about it," Kathy replied sharply, also abruptly and suddenly rising from her chair. "Then I won't be in this house either." After these words, Michael, holding Betty's hand tightly, headed for the exit. Without saying anything more to his parents, he really didn't let her offend, just like he had promised the girl. After a few minutes, the couple was already quite far away from the house where the guy and his parents lived. That said, they continued walking fast without saying anything to each other. Michael didn't even look at Betty until the moment when she pulled him sharply by the arm, thus stopping him. "We're not at your house anymore. Let's stop. I can't walk so fast in heels anymore. I'm tired. Let's sit on the bench and talk about it. And I'll get a break from all this. I really can't take it anymore." Michael silently sat down on the bench, which was in close proximity to them. As he did so, he continued to remain silent. It wasn't until the moment Betty lifted his face with her hands so that he was looking exactly at her. The guy exhaled nervously and said with a shudder in his voice, "I'm sorry for this behavior on the part of my parents. I don't know what got into them. I didn't expect this, to be honest." "It's okay," Betty said calmly. "It wasn't your behavior, but your parents, for whose actions you're not responsible. So just try to calm down, and then we'll think about what to do next, to eliminate the possibility of serious problems." "I've already made up my mind," Michael said sharply, turning to Betty. "No, you can't just leave home. If you do, you'll be without an education and without your dream. And that's not a good option. You'd have to make up with your parents, And then we just stick to the original plan of just meeting in secret. That way you don't have to worry about your future and still stay together. That sounds like a great option to me, one that shouldn't be ignored. Michael sighed. He realized that his girlfriend was right, but he didn't want to go back home and make peace with his parents. Apparently, there were no other options and would actually have to do as they had originally planned. Only after Michael gets an education, he will be able to independently fully provide for his family. Until then, they will just have to bear with their situation. The couple talked, after which they came to the conclusion that the guy needs to return home and do everything possible to restore the relationship. And Betty will just go home and pretend this evening never happened. She won't be upset and worried about what Kathy said. Right after Betty went home, she met up with her mother, who had just recently returned from another meeting. Adriana was very close in her relationship with her daughter, and therefore Betty did not hide anything from her and always liked to have a heart-to-heart talk, discuss various problems and unclear situations that troubled the girl. How was your acquaintance with your parents? What did they say about you in that dress? It's not branded, but it was custom-made for you. Well, it didn't go too well, but I don't think it's gonna affect our relationship. Michael went home to talk to his parents. I think they'll reconcile and everything will end up okay. It's just like that. Let's go and have tea. Are you going to tell me what happened in there? Betty told her mother everything, but Adriana wasn't even surprised. She smiled and then calmly said that this is just the situation when you are judged just by your appearance, not by your behavior, not by your manners and education. Yes, you went to a regular school, but they don't know how many tutors you had in all your subjects. Which is why I can't even imagine how stupid and shallow your young man's mother is. Even when I met your father's parents, I never saw such a show. Although they didn't want to see me as a girl from a dysfunctional family. You really need this guy. Maybe you should look for someone else. Mom, come on. He's fine, really. You'll see, things will work out. They talked for a while, and then Adriana went back to work for the last time, telling her daughter an important admonition. In case you have any serious problems, call me or Daddy right away. We'll resolve it as soon as possible, and your abusers will pay for it. Just don't try to do it on your own. You don't have as many connections and opportunities as we do. You got me. Betty nodded. Her parents had dealt with her problem at school once before, and it had ended up as an administrative offense. Although the problem was a simple, hurtful word from a classmate. That was why the girl preferred to solve all sorts of moments on her own. And only in case of emergency she called her parents, but she never argued with them and always agreed to requests. The next few days passed restlessly. Michael did not appear at the university and did not get in touch with his girlfriend. At the same time, he did not even warn her that he would be absent for some time for one reason or another, although he always did. Betty was very worried that something might have happened. Towards the end of the week of Michael's absence, Betty started to get very worried and even planned to go to her young man's house to find out exactly what was going on with him and if everything was okay. But suddenly she met his friend in the corridor of the university, who said that he just changed his phone number for some reason unknown to him and went to his mother's parents for a week. And on Monday, he had to be in class because more than a week's absences could not be smoothed over. Michael actually went to school on Monday. He was panicked and very upset, but still sat down with Betty, who was most likely the cause of the major problems in his life. Michael, what's your problem? You've been out of touch for so long. I was starting to worry that something might be wrong with you. Why didn't you tell me you'd be gone so long? Betty looked at the guy with worry and tenderness. He didn't even look up at her. You and I need to be as careful as possible and keep some distance from each other. My parents are very unhappy that I brought you, so they've been playing tricks on me. They sent me to another city. I spent a week at another university where they also teach journalism. The building looks terrible. The teachers are mediocre. I know some of the material much better than they do, but they're arrogant and condescending. They also changed my phone number so that you couldn't contact me, and I had to live without my friends and acquaintances for a week. They wanted to show me what I could lose if I went against them, so there you go. But everything's fine now, right? You're back, so you don't have to worry about us getting into trouble again. It's not that simple. If they catch me with you again, I'll have to move to another city and go to that university permanently. Not only will I not be able to see you anymore, but I won't get a proper education. I'd also lose my closest friends. That's why you and I have to be very careful, so that there would be no negative consequences." Michael hesitated, and then added, "I don't want to lose you. Let's not take any unnecessary risks. Pay attention. The option of losing her loved one was simply absurd." And so Betty agreed that it was necessary to behave carefully and cautiously in order to minimize the risk of the many problems that would result for her loved one. Betty and Michael began to carefully hide their relationship from everyone. Strangely enough, the couple was able to hide their relationship from everyone around them until they graduated from university. They practically did not communicate at the university, did not talk even during a break for food, and with all their appearance showed that they did not have any relationship with each other. Moreover, in the first days after everything that happened, it was decided to play the role, a quarreling couple who could not remain friends. But now, finally, such a long and agonizing study is over, and now the couple decides to publicly continue the relationship. Now Michael has nothing to fear, because his parents simply cannot threaten him with a transfer to another city or anything else. They will have to come to terms with their son's choice and accept Betty, so as not to provoke conflicts and not to lose the opportunity to communicate with their son. At any rate, that was what the girl thought. But did her young man think the same way? Michael decided to tell his parents that he plans to continue his relationship with Betty during his birthday party, to which a huge number of guests were invited. Of course, such an event was chosen intentionally. After all, the guy was sure that his mother was not capable of making a scandal in the event, that there would be a large number of guests around. But how wrong was he at that moment? "Honey, are you sure this is the way we should tell your parents?" asked Betty. After the young man told her in detail about his plan. "What if she starts humiliating me in front of a huge number of guests? What are we going to do then? I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I would be mocked not only by your parents, but by everyone present. I'm not comfortable with that. Don't worry, it'll be okay. They won't. I have a clear plan that I will stick to, and then everything will go just fine. Just trust me, and don't worry." Extra he kissed Betty. "Now I have to head off to get ready for my birthday party. I have to get everything bought and picked out. What will the food be on the table? And I've got a few little things to do, so let's meet tomorrow at my place. But please don't be late. A lot of people will be wearing evening gowns. But if you don't have one, don't worry. You can come in whatever you feel comfortable in. You look beautiful in anything." After that, the guy left, and the girl was left to reason about the correctness of the decision. She still thought about the fact that they would talk about their relationship in a quiet environment, not among the many guests, to gauge the reaction of Kathy and Benjamin, and only then to make a decision regarding their union. Of course, Betty had a number of very attractive evening gowns, each of which emphasized her waist or her beautiful form to a certain extent. But it was necessary to conform to the opinion that was formed around the girl, so she opted for a classic combination dress that was embroidered with crystals. But of course, they will be just cheap costume jewelry for everyone. Minimalism in the image and jewelry, as well as almost complete absence of makeup. All this helped to maintain the legend, but it also transformed and adorned the girl. She felt confident and attractive in such an image. But at the same time, Betty understood perfectly well that there would be other, more expensive and elegant dresses and suits at the birthday party. So there was no point in trying to attract the most attention. Betty approached Michael's house with a stone on her soul. She didn't know what to expect from this evening or how it would end. But she knew that tonight would be the night that decided whether or not they could be together. After the girl rang the doorbell, there was no answer for some time. On the other hand, neither the sounds of music nor voices could be heard. All in all, the atmosphere was not at all like a birthday party. Finally, only a few minutes later, her young man appeared on the doorstep, smiled radiantly, and escorted her into the room where the birthday party was being held. Predominantly in the room were exclusively adults who were talking among themselves and almost did not pay any attention to other people, including the culprit of the celebration. There were hardly any young people. It didn't seem to be a birthday party for a young boy, but just a gathering of elderly relatives discussing their many illnesses and problems they had encountered recently. Betty looked around and realized that she felt completely uncomfortable among so many strangers, especially considering that they all appeared to be considerably older than her. She looked at her boyfriend, who was standing next to her, and quietly asked why there were only adults here. "Are these your friends?" "No," Michael answered quietly. "It's just that in our family we celebrate all our birthdays in the presence of all our relatives. We don't invite friends or strangers, so everyone in this room has known each other for a long time. You're the only one nobody knows, since my parents prefer not to talk about you at all. But that's just for now. I'll introduce you to everyone soon. And then you'll have time to mingle with the guests. I will. In the meantime, let's go to the table." But before the lovers could even walk to the center of the room, Kathy stood in front of them. She gave Betty a judgmental and even squeamish look and then looked away. "What's she doing here?" "I thought we discussed having a maid. We don't want anyone without references and positive reviews. Besides, our housekeeper must have a culinary background, and I doubt that she has it, and therefore, say goodbye to her and tell her that she is unfortunately not the right person for the position." "We'll do better." Over the next few days, a huge number of options were already coming in. "Mom, she's not here to work. I'll explain it to you soon. In the meantime, let's just enjoy my birthday. Don't ruin the party. If there's anything you don't like, we'll discuss it tomorrow." The woman just nodded unhappily at Betty's presence at the party. After that, she stepped aside. Michael walked with the girl to the table, poured her a glass of champagne and embraced her, saying affectionately, "Today you will remember for a long time. It will be the best day of your life, or one of the best. I think you'll be happy with the surprise I prepared for you. I'm sure it's the last thing you'd expect from me, but it's your birthday. You shouldn't have taken such good care of me. Now it will be our day." He kissed the girl on the cheek, and in the group of people who were closest to the couple, whispers were heard for about half an hour. The couple just enjoyed the atmosphere and talked about everything in the world, and only after the last guests came to the party. According to the pre-made list, the guy went to the center to make an announcement. He tapped the glass he had in his hand after everyone looked back at him, invited Betty over to his place. The girl, with great reluctance and agony, but still came out to her young man and stood where he indicated. There was silence in the whole house. "I have an important announcement to make," Michael began. Looking around in search of his parents in the hall, he noticed his mother, who stood just a few meters away and looked at him carefully. But it was impossible to see his father. The man was not particularly fond of such events, and therefore the fact of his absence would not surprise anyone. Today is a very significant day. For me, it is the day on which I was born, on which my difficult life began. It was full of obstacles and difficulties. I am grateful to everyone who was with me in difficult moments, who helped me to cope with numerous problems. Each of you is important to me, and I appreciate your presence at my celebration. But a particularly important and welcome guest is this girl, Betty. She and I have been through a lot, even went through a difficult period during which there was no way to communicate and stay close. And still in every new day, in every moment, she looked for opportunities to meet me, to talk to me, just to know that I was doing well. She was with me both in sickness and in health, helping me with sound advice and a firm shoulder. And gratitude is just not appropriate. For all the time we were together, I realized one thing: we are not just a friend and a friend. We are more than that. I'm madly in love with this girl, and the only thing I want to ask her. He turned to Betty, who looked not just confused, but somewhat frightened. "You're going to be my wife." After these words, Michael took out the ring box and got down on one knee, obviously waiting for a response from Betty. The girl for a few seconds just remained silent, looking at the ring and trying to understand what was going on and what consequences could be from her positive decision. But then, gathering her strength, she raises her eyes to her boyfriend and confidently says yes. After this answer, applause rises in the hall. Many people begin to talk, discussing what has just happened. Looking at the situation from a variety of angles, There were those who have already managed to take a few photos, which were successfully published on the network. Michael started circling the girl and kissing her, but his mother slowly sat down on a chair, not believing what had just happened right in front of her eyes. She didn't say a word, still not understanding how her son could do such a thing. Maybe someone had made him do it. Maybe something so terrible had happened that he had no choice. Kathy was certain that all of this was not happening of her child's own free will, and so she was already beginning to think about how the situation could be resolved. During the entire celebration, neither Kathy nor Benjamin ever approached the young ones. They did not congratulate them, but at the same time they did not make any scandal and proceedings in front of other guests, which could not but please Betty, despite everything that had happened, despite the first meeting with the parents of the guy, which went just terrible. The proposal was made quite calmly, and many guests even congratulated her. Maybe her husband's parents just accepted the fact that the young love each other, and now they will be fine. Now we'll not have to hide from anyone and worry that rumors about the relationship will reach Kathy, who is ready to do everything possible just to get rid of the hated Betty. Or else this is not the end, but just the beginning of the whole story. Right after all the guests left Michael and his parents' house, his mother immediately summoned the boyfriend for a talk to find out what was going on. She still hoped that it was all just a silly joke, which turned out to be not particularly successful. But after her son confirmed that the proposal was genuine and he was ready to commit his life to Betty, Kathy just went ballistic. She was no longer trying to control herself, no longer trying not to yell and act cultured. How dare you do that? Who gave you that right? You and I have discussed this matter, and you promised me and my father that this girl would be finished. She can't be part of our family. She can't just go from dirt to dignity like that. We've all worked, our whole family, all the generations, so that today you could have everything you want. And now you're back to poverty again. Kathy sat down on the couch next to her husband, who was completely calm. Unlike the woman, he just looked at his son with displeasure at the way he stood there calmly, not even thinking that the decision was wrong. After a few minutes, it was Benjamin who decided to summarize the situation. It turns out that you did make the decision to marry this girl, and completely out of your own free will, without consulting your parents. You made the decision that you think is the right one. And so bear in mind, you'll be responsible for all the consequences too. And we, as your parents, have no choice, because you have already finished your education, and now you can get a job and provide for yourself and your future family on your own. Of course, you didn't think about the fact that if you make a radical decision, you might just lose any financial help from our side. But that's okay. Now the only thing we need to do as soon as possible is to meet the bride's parents, so we know who we'll be dealing with in the near future. Do you even know them? Do you know who our future in-laws are? No, but it doesn't matter. I'm sure she has parents as wonderful as she is. So there shouldn't be any problems with the wedding arrangements. You'll meet about everything. You'll talk, and then we'll start preparing for the wedding. There's a lot to do, so I don't think we should put off getting to know each other and other things. The sooner we start getting to know everyone, and the more attention we pay to even the smallest things, the more likely it's going to work out just fine. Of course, we can't do anything this fast without help from our parents, but that's okay. There's time. Right, Kathy suddenly exclaimed. It was so loud that both men held their heads in surprise. We'll just have a wedding. We don't have to make up anything. We'll just insist that all the costs of the arrangements be shared between the families. And then you don't have to worry about finding a reason not to get married. The parents of the bride themselves will make her refuse, because they cannot afford to carry out all the necessary processes in full. And in case they refuse to pay for the ceremony separately, we will refuse it at all, as we will consider it an insult to our family. Mom, no, don't you dare stop me from being happy. I've spent so much time hiding a relationship you didn't like. And now, after I've taken such an important and serious step as proposing, you're talking about ruining it again. How dare you ruin my life like that, like I'm some kind of puppet? So calm down, Benjamin said calmly. No one is depriving you of your happiness. Since you have decided to have a wedding, you should do everything as tradition dictates. And according to them, the bride and groom really do pay all the expenses for the wedding exactly in half. More precisely, their parents should provide funding in the necessary amount. Often, it is the parents who discuss all the moments among themselves, and the young are just present. But sometimes their opinion is also taken into account. And in the event that one of the parties refuses to separate payment for the wedding, the second party has the right to refuse such serious expenses or to demand a complete absence of guests from the bride's side. Choose what is best for you. The man looked seriously at his son, who stood with his head down and did not even look in his direction in response. We will have to meet your bride's parents anyway, as she cannot marry without their blessing. So the first thing we need to do is go to her house to talk about it right now. Michael called Betty to verify the address where she lived with her parents. Of course, the guy knew exactly where her house was located, but he didn't know the exact address. After all, they always walked half an hour away. Michael's parents, directly with the guy himself, were already near the house of the potential bride. The first idea of it was quite doubtful in the parents. But on the whole, the house is big enough, Benjamin said. God, who cares if it's big or not? As long as it looks awful, Kathy replied. Its size had no bearing on its attractiveness or the comfort of living. Big houses were often left to poor laborers after their employers died. And to slaves, too. It wasn't uncommon for their owners to leave their homes by will, which is why I wouldn't focus so much on the size of the house. I'm afraid to go inside. I wonder what would be waiting for me in there. Michael was the first to approach the door and immediately froze, realizing that it was made of solid wood. He decided not to point it out to his parents, not to listen to any more arguments, but just to ring the bell and have Betty or one of her relatives come out. The guy didn't know exactly who the girl lived with, as he had never asked her any such questions, but he was fully confident that they must all be quite friendly and welcoming. Almost immediately, footsteps were heard, and then the front door opened, revealing a very attractive woman who smiled at him and asked him exactly what he had come for. It was Adriana, Betty's mom, who was already well aware of the fact that the parents would be arriving shortly and would want to meet them after the proposal. "Excuse me, you must be Betty's mom. I'm her young man who proposed to her today. My parents and I would really like to meet you so that we know with whom we are going to play the wedding ceremony." The guy's parents came closer and were clearly confused the moment they saw a rather attractive woman who was wearing beautiful, obviously brand-name clothes and smiled at them. For a few seconds, there was a silent scene, during which no one dared to say or do anything. But then Betty's mom opened the door wider and mouthed, "You come in. Don't be shy. Let's talk about how exactly the ceremony will be conducted, where the young people will rest, what wishes are set for the wedding and traditions, and so on." She opened the doors wider so that the guests could pass freely into the living room. And it was the moment Michael looked inside that he was simply shocked by the decoration and rich furnishings. He took a few steps forward, gesturing to his parents that they should go inside as well. Kathy and Benjamin extremely reluctantly headed inside the house, expecting to see anything but a huge amount of expensive furniture, originals, and quality replicas, famous paintings, gold elements, and a huge number of cameras. Literally, every centimeter was perfectly visible from one or another component of the video surveillance system. And therefore, the owners of the house did not worry at all about the fact that real precious metals were used in the decoration. They stopped in the hallway, scrutinizing every element of the interior, realizing that this family lived no worse than they did, and perhaps even much better. They glanced at each other and then went into the kitchen after the mistress of the house. The couple was extremely embarrassed that they were going to initially just upset the wedding. And now they were silently walking through the posh house that Betty was living in. After everyone was seated in the dining room with tea brewing, Adriana looked around carefully at everyone present and began introductions. She introduced herself and her spouse, and then asked the guests to introduce themselves. After a couple of minutes, Betty came out, who was dressed simply beautifully. Despite the fact that the girl was in a simple homemade garment, she looked completely different than usual. She was very feminine, and it looked rich. Simple, but at the same time natural materials and interesting cut looked fresh and fashionable. This suit was not so long ago presented at a fashion show. Therefore, it was immediately clear that the family was much richer than it might have seemed while walking through the house. At one point, Adriana asked why you decided to visit us. Did you have something going on, or did you just decide to get to know each other after the proposal? Why didn't you decide to meet us before the big event? Kathy was visibly confused after such a question. She looked at her husband, who only shrugged his shoulders and did not answer the lady of the house. Michael's mother had already clearly begun to worry at the moment when the silence began to drag on, and therefore she decided to solve the situation herself and quickly. Yes, we decided to get to know each other. We just didn't think that everything would happen so quickly, and that's why we didn't dare to visit you before. Besides, there was no reason for us to visit you. But now we have a good reason. It would be indecent to refuse. So we've decided to come to you to talk things over. You understand, the wedding is such a responsible event where everything must be coordinated and organized. And we, as parents, should support our children on this important day so that they do not feel abandoned and can just enjoy the holiday without worrying about the many little things and mishaps. She smiled, trying to appear as welcoming and friendly as possible. But it came out weakly. It was obvious that the smile was strained, and therefore it looked like a cheap performance, which is played. With all this far from the best actors, it looked ridiculous. And since when did you decide that you were willing to help me decorate for the day? Betty asked the groom's mother. Didn't you say that I wasn't right for your family and that our relationship with Michael was doomed and all that? You didn't want me to keep in touch with him, and even tried to keep him away from me until the relationship became secret. And now you're suddenly saying that everything is great, and you're ready to be directly involved in organizing the wedding ceremony. How hypocritical does that seem? Yeah, and the relationship certainly wasn't that fast-paced. What are you telling me? They dated for several years, and now your son has decided to propose to my daughter. I don't see how that's surprising. If they've been on a long road to committing their lives together forever. If they had only been dating for a couple weeks, and Michael proposed and my daughter said yes without saying she needed to think about it, it would have been quick and weird. And now the situation was very logical and consistent. Kathy didn't know what to say to that. Her original plan had completely collapsed, and she knew perfectly well that there was no need to ruin the wedding. Moreover, the thought was now swirling around in her head that this marriage would even be beneficial to her family. After all, it would allow for some upward mobility and new connections in high society. She looked at Adriana, who was whispering with her daughter, smiling all the while. Suddenly the women's gazes met, to which Adriana said in a calm voice and with a steady stride, Betty told me that you were not going to accept her into your family. What makes you think we'd accept your son as a fiancé? And what does that have to do with the fact that you won't take her in? If I understand correctly, the bride is not joining her husband's family, but building a separate unit of society with him, for which they alone will be responsible. And all your words and reasoning seem absurd to me. Moreover, insults to my daughter can be considered as insult of personality, for which I have every right to write a statement and demand compensation from you. Also, this attitude has caused my daughter serious trauma, and therefore more punishment can be demanded. But as your future relatives, we won't do that. But in the event that Betty ever tells me anything about you treating her badly again, we'll take care of the situation from the beginning so that all conflicts can be resolved. There won't be any problems. I guarantee it, Benjamin replied. Then he handed Adriana his business card. In case you decide to talk about how the wedding will be organized, as well as what exactly we will buy, what amounts will be involved in all this. Just give me a call and we will discuss everything. Everything will be calm, without any scandals and accusations and other things. We are ready to fully participate in every organizational moment and financially and directly physically. Want to hang balloons. The most important thing is that you call me. Now, if you'll excuse us. My wife needs to take her pills tonight. It's been a stressful day, so she could get sick. Adriana escorted the guests out and then returned to the room where the young people who had decided to legalize their own relationship remained. They discussed the situation among themselves. Why didn't you tell me that you didn't have the family everyone was talking about? You didn't deny that your parents were poor, and you never wore any expensive clothes, even though you have a huge amount of them. Did you think your financial status mattered to me or something? The guy seriously looked at the girl, who was sitting in the chair, looking carefully at everything that was going on. No, I just always told everyone that I had poor parents, so that there were no hypocritical people and those who would be with me only for their own benefit. As a result, rumors that I had poor parents began to spread very rapidly, so that every other person at the university said that I was not from the best family. Even you've heard the rumors, before I'd even met you, so there's nothing to talk about. And I just decided not to deny it. Why would I want to prove anything to anyone? I do not have so much free time to tell everyone the story of my family and prove that we really have money. It was much easier to agree with everything and say that everything is exactly as they heard it. And you didn't even ask about who exactly my parents are or how much money they make, what kind of clothes I wear, if I like jewelry, and so on. You and I just started bonding. And during all this time, you never once brought up the topic of finances and material well-being of my family. And that just couldn't help but hook me, because your parents' earnings didn't matter to me. I was going to live and build a family with you, not with them. Exactly what difference does it make who they are and how much they make a day or a year? If we don't plan to take money from them, I think it's worth mentioning. Don't I have any right to know the truth about who and where my potential bride is from? Can I be sure that you won't be in need of anything, that you won't go without food, and that you won't deny yourself the fulfillment of your natural needs? Do I have to specify all these things separately? They can't just be discussed between two people in love. Yes, they can, but it's just not something that's ever been brought up between us. Does it matter now? Did your parents accept your choice? My father himself personally said that he would make a direct decision in organizing the wedding ceremony. I don't think they could just lie in this situation. No, if my father said so, then he's really going to do exactly what he said he was going to do, so you don't have to worry at all. That's what Adriana said. Now it's time to get acquainted. Let's go. I'll introduce you to your father, and then we'll sit down and have tea together. We'll talk about what kind of wedding you want and how exactly you met. It's all so interesting. It's like I'm reliving it all over again. Those just incredible positive emotions of falling in love. I'm so glad that your life turned out exactly the way you wanted it to, and that no obstacles were able to stand in the way of your love. Michael liked Ethan. Moreover, the man knew him well. After all, he had once independently awarded diplomas and letters of thanks for active participation in the life of the region. For striving to learn various sciences, they talked for several more hours, discussing all sorts of trivialities of history, acquaintances, difficulties that the young people will have to face after they pass the stage of marriage and start living separately from everyone else. After returning home, Kathy and Benjamin immediately began to discuss all that they had done and to look for potential solutions to the problem. They tried to find a way not only to establish a positive relationship with the bride's parents, but also to try to restore at least a neutral relationship with Betty. After all, fighting with the children of such influential parents is a very dangerous venture, especially with insults and threats, which were originally in the speech of the groom's mother, when she first got acquainted with the girl, but then she could not even imagine how the story would end. And now she will have to deal with all the resulting consequences from the choices she made on her own, which turned out to be wrong. Preparations for the wedding ceremony began almost immediately after Michael proposed to Betty. The couple quickly decided on the exact date they wanted to organize the marriage ceremony, and then began the rapid preparation for the day. Ethan and Adriana made the decision not to establish close communication with the groom's parents after everything that had happened. Yes, both parties were directly involved in the organizational processes, helping financially and overseeing numerous small tasks. Even though the family contacted a wedding planner, but they had little to no communication with each other only when necessary on wedding matters. Kathy and Benjamin, for a very long period of time, still tried to establish a relationship, start communicating, and so on. But after a clear and precise answer from Betty, who stated that her family was not interested in them. They simply stopped trying and wasting time on fruitless actions. After the wedding was over, the families never spoke to each other again. The marriage ceremony of the young people was very successful. It was held in an off-site version, just as Betty had planned when she was still a child. The wedding was organized exactly as she wanted to the smallest elements. The delight of the celebration was simply inexpressible. And these are the emotions that will definitely be remembered for years to come. The emotions that the couple will tell their children about for many years to come. Michael never doubted his decision for a moment. Every day he was more and more convinced that Betty was the woman with whom he wanted to spend every day of his life, with whom he wanted to meet sunrises and see off sunsets, together, plan vacations, and make wonderful plans for a long and happy future. That's how it sometimes happens in life, that appearance is so deceptive that you cannot even suspect that everything is not what it seems at first glance. It is not for nothing that they say that you should not judge a book by its cover. In the same way, and about a person cannot be judged only by his appearance and what others say about him. All of this can be no less deceptive than the cover of a book.